If you think about the level of automation that can be done with AI, the amount of drudge work basically that can be removed from people, it's huge. When you think about how quick things are to do now than before the internet, we saved so much time there. Where did that time go? People are working longer than ever before now. They're more stressed than ever before. No matter how much time we saved, we just filled it with more work. So for people listening to this, it's like, how can you shape your business? Is to be thinking about, if we're saving people's time, how can we free it up so that they're learning, or they're spending time with their family, or they're just developing themselves in all those ways that I think are really important.
When you're talking about wellness, what do you mean?
I think wellness in terms of the workplace is essentially, how are you making your people feel as good as they possibly can so that they can perform as well as they possibly can within their job. As businesses, we look after our technology, we look after our buildings, but do we really look after our people with the same level of attention as that? And I think that's one mindset shift that people have to be aware of as well. As HR people or as business leaders, if we're putting in place a well-being strategy for our employees, we're not just doing it from the goodness of our own heart. We're doing it because if we can make people feel a bit better, so that they're sleeping well, they're exercising, they're eating well, all those kind of good things, then we know that's going to help them to perform better at work.
This episode is brought to you by Instant Impact. Instant Impact provides transformative talent solutions to small and mid-sized companies that are making between 30 and 500 hires each year. If your recruitment's giving you a headache and you don't know where to start, then give the team at Instant Impact a call or visit www.instant-impact.com for more information. Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. We're seeing record levels of burnout, stress, and I think most importantly, disengagement in our workplaces. And yet so many organizations are still approaching employee well-being as a bit of an afterthought, something to bolt on, a nice perk rather than something that's sort of fundamental to the employee experience. But what if I told you that some of the most successful companies in the world have rethought this entirely? My guest today is Luke Bullen, VP of the UK at Wellhub. Luke is right at the forefront of transforming how companies think about workplace wellness, moving well beyond sort of traditional perks and really looking at how to do it in a sustainable and futuristic way. So I can't think of anyone better to talk about this absolutely critical topic with. Luke, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Felix. Great to be here. Thank you for that very complimentary intro.
Well, we'll see. We'll circle back to it at the end of the podcast and see how we got on. Let's just start right at the beginning. What is it that you think that some companies are missing about well-being?
I mean, I think firstly, it's important to recognize just how far we have come in this space over the past 5-10 years. It's difficult to remember, but 10 years ago, well-being was seen as something that was a differentiator for companies. It was something that perhaps the best companies did, but for others, it was very much an afterthought. And now I do think that most companies are seeing it as an integral part of their people strategy. So that's a very positive thing. I think one thing that companies now need to almost take a check on is to make sure that they're doing well-being for the right reasons. How are they thinking about their well-being strategy? Is it just something they have to do because it's part of their benefit strategy? Or is it something where they're genuinely trying to motivate behavior change, which is where I think most companies really get return on investment. So I think we need to think about at this point, what are we doing within well-being and how can we take it to the next level?
I think you're right. I think the vast majority of businesses, I have fallen into this camp at certain times. I think we think about wellness in maybe a bit of a two-dimensional space, a sort of almost like a tick box exercise on the benefit packages. So before we go into how wellness, well-being can impact performance and behaviors, as you were talking about before, could we I'm going to ask a really stupid question. When you're talking about wellness, what do you mean?
I think wellness in terms of the workplace is essentially, how are you making your people feel as good as they possibly can so that they can perform as well as they possibly can within their job? That's almost what it is. As businesses, we look after our technology, we look after our buildings, but do we really look after our people with the same level of attention as that? And I think that's one mindset shift that people have to be aware of as well. As HR people or as business leaders, if we're putting in place a well-being strategy for our employees, we're not just doing it from the goodness of our own heart. We're doing it because if we can make people feel a bit better, so that they're sleeping well, they're exercising, they're eating well, all those kind of good things, then we know that's going to help them to perform better at work. So you can kind of broaden that out to as many categories as you want. Within Wellhub, we think about fitness, mental health, women's health, nutrition, and sleep. Those are the main categories that we really focus on. And we think that if you get those 5 things right, then you're going to put the vast majority of people in a very good position to be feeling as good as they possibly can.
A lot of those things, I think there's a visceral reaction that some people have. They don't feel instinctively like a company's problem.
Yeah.
Or like a CEO's problem. Why are they?
So interestingly, we did some surveys recently with some CEOs. We asked about 1,500 different CEOs around the world how they thought about well-being. And the vast majority of them now see their workplace well-being strategy as a core, I think the phrasing was an essential part of their business strategy.
Wow.
So the key thing to say is that businesses do see the benefit. But when I think about those 5 things, so I think fitness now is accepted as something that companies should be helping people with. People have been doing that for years. Mental health and women's health are going down that path as well, right? Mental health for a long time now, perhaps not a long time, since COVID, really lots of companies have said mental well-being is something we have to think about. And women's health, again, it's increasingly accepted that people who are going through the menopause or who are going through fertility challenges or whatever else, we should support them as employers. Probably the ones that you might kind of viscerally react to are things like nutrition and sleep. But I don't know about you, but if I have a couple of bad nights sleep, and I have a toddler, so I have a few of those, it has a bigger impact on my own personal well-being and on my performance at work than on pretty well anything else.
Massively.
You know?
Also, I'm 2 toddlers, not to worry about you, but I feel it.
Okay, I'm still debating the second one, but okay. Yeah, so if we accept that, look, how you eat and how you sleep impacts your productivity, then we should accept that actually if we can give people a nudge in the right direction, then it will be a good thing. So if we can give people access to, for example, tools that are going to help them to sleep better, that are going to educate them more about eating well and eating healthily, that has to be a good thing because ultimately it's going to impact their own engagement, their own performance, and ultimately their own productivity.
And I suppose getting people to engage with these things, that's the behavior change you were talking about before. So if we're looking at a bit of an equation, which is sleep, nutrition, exercise, mental health, women's health for women, got all 5, well done me, equals better performance, whether that's, in the personal life, athletic life or work life, then you're not necessarily, I guess the argument then is to business leaders is if you can create an environment that encourages all of those behaviors and therefore has an impact on your business performance, why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you do it?
Exactly. I think the word you use there is an environment of well-being. That's really important, or a culture of well-being. If you can do these things so that the majority of people are feeling well in themselves, that has a knock-on effect because then they encourage other people to behave in certain ways. So we see this in companies that we work with. We typically will start with about 1 in 5 people using Wellhub, for example, and that has a knock-on effect so that every month, I've never looked at a company that we work with who hasn't seen enrollment grow every single month. And that's because there is a culture of well-being that's building, that's being driven by the leaders. And people are starting to see people look after themselves a bit better and are wanting to do it. And then are able to opt in and look after themselves in whatever way that they want to. So that environment, that culture of well-being is really important. It's not just giving people something to do. It's also thinking about how, as a company, are we supporting people's well-being? I think one of the stats that I've noticed recently is the number one reason that people report for stress is work-related stress. So the main reason that people are stressed is because of their work. The least we can do is try to kind of balance that out so that it's kind of neutral. So on the one hand, it's about how can we improve people's performance, but on the other hand, there is also a certain moral element to say, look, if we're causing people stress, how can we try to remove the things that are making them feel that way? So it's not just about the benefits like Wellhub you might give to people. It's also about how can you make sure they feel supported by their manager? How can they feel like they can go out and exercise in the middle of the day if they wanted to? How can they make sure they can fit in their school pickups? Like all of those things, if you don't have them right, add to their stress.
It's funny, I was just about to ask that question around that sort of role modeling flexibility. And actually just before this, we're recording, I don't know, what time is it? 3:45. I've just been to the gym beforehand. So I think we're lucky to be in an organization where we do have people at all different levels sort of role modeling that level of flexibility. It helps that we're most of our business leaders have young kids, so it's sort of like a level of necessity within all of that. But a lot of organizations, I'd imagine, you come across maybe don't have that inbuilt culture, and I guess if you just whack a benefit in there, it's not going to have the immediate impact. So what can companies do, as well as bringing in the right benefits? What can they do to affect that culture, that environment of well-being?
One of the key things that our research shows is that when CEOs themselves participate in well-being programs, the program is much more likely to be successful because the participation rate is much more likely to be higher. And there's cause and effect there. One is like the CEO is being seen to participate in this thing and perhaps is communicating about that. That's role modeling. But it's also, if the CEO is participating in the wellbeing program, they probably have created an environment already where other people feel able to do so and feel they have the time to do so. So that's one important thing. How can companies try to do that? Well, one of the things is getting those senior stakeholders on board in the first place. I know a lot of your audience will be HR leaders. One of the other key bits of our research said that when HR leaders report into their CEOs monthly on the impact of our wellbeing program, again, the percentage of CEOs who saw it as a success was much, much higher than if they're reporting annually.
I guess it's just so important, isn't it, to approach benefits as a business case and to have the numbers that sort of sit with them. Have you guys ever done a study which shows the likely ROI of putting in a really effective wellness program?
Yeah, we've done it's kind of the golden standard for us, right? For us to be able to say, and I think companies know this instinctively. They know that if we look after our people, you're going to see results from it. The hard thing is then convincing their CFO of it, but particularly in this environment we're in today. So yes, we've done a lot of work on this. Actually, this is the average wellbeing program. So nothing to do with Wellhub, but your kind of bog standard wellbeing program you started, that sees a return on investment of about 103%. So it basically pays for itself.
Wow.
But for Wellhub, we see an average reported ROI of about 136%. So the way we've done this is to work with, I think it's about 50 companies, and to do those with people who are using Wellhub versus those who aren't, and also to look at people who weren't using Wellhub and then to those who are, and we're able to track that over a number of years and have it properly control test and everything else. So those are the kind of also the ROI that are measurable. So things like retention rates, number of sick days, health costs, those kind of things. But as we spoke about earlier, there are also lots of intangible things that are really difficult to actually measure, like how are people feeling, what's the vibe in the office, all those kind of things I would say are on top of that. But yeah, generally the key stat for us is about 136%.
And I just want to pull it back to the role modeling point, because I think it's a really interesting one. How hard do you find it to get the top of the company to engage with wellness, when that, I guess, often means time away from the desk?
Yeah. I think CEOs increasingly see it as part of their responsibility. So in most companies now, end of year reports, they are reporting on the things they're doing for the environment, for gender equality, for example, and increasingly within wellbeing. So it's something where most CEOs like to be seen, at least, to be doing the right thing within wellbeing. We have a couple of client case studies where big clients, talking a 10,000 person client is the one I have in mind, a utilities client. The CEO was the one who launched Wellhub, their own client. They announced it, and the response they got was absolutely incredible. For other companies, of course, it doesn't get that high. My impression is that sometimes certain leaders at more junior levels don't feel they shouldn't take it up to the CEO because they won't be interested, or because it's below their pay scale. But actually, whenever we are able to get up to the CEO, they are always in a position where they're interested in it, they see the benefit of it, and they want to help. So I think it's maybe HR leaders having some more confidence to be able to take these things up.
Have you got any stats? I'm drilling you for stats now, but I wonder whether CEOs take their... I'm just thinking about the CEOs that I know. Everyone does some form of like nuts endurance sport or play sport to a really high level. There's always some form of exercise involved.
Yeah.
I think they're probably, maybe not therapy, but certainly most likely to have seen coaches.
Yeah.
Actually, just sort of having thought it through and asked the question in the first place, actually, do you see the opposite? Do you see that CEOs actually maybe take their health, their well-being more seriously?
I think CEOs are probably more likely to be able to look after their well-being in the right way. So a big stat that we saw come out of our latest return on well-being report was that over the past year, 93% of CEOs say their well-being has got better versus about 50% of normal employees. And equally, it's a very similar stat for those people who rate their well-being as good versus CEOs rating their well-being as good. It's about almost all CEOs rated their well-being as good, and about half of employees did. And I think when you think about it, for employees, what are the main barriers that stop them from looking after their well-being? First one is cost. You know, if you think about a gym membership in the UK, the average gym membership is about £50 a month. You normally have to pay a joining fee. You normally have to lock into a year to get that price. If you want to do therapy, it's £60 a session maybe?
Yeah, if you're lucky.
Probably more. Eating healthily, if you then want to think about, well, do I want an app to look after my health, my sleep health, my nutrition? If you want to get menopause support, all those kind of things, those are all things that are very costly. Then there's also things like time and their schedule and whatever else. CEOs typically wouldn't have those kind of barriers. Cost wouldn't be an issue. They have the flexibility to be able to afford a gym membership near their home and near work, and probably a personal trainer as well, and speak to a therapist. So a lot of those kind of barriers go away, and I think that's why we see that big disparity.
Yeah, I guess maybe the part that was surprising to me is this time piece. You know, speaking to a therapist takes 45 minutes out of your day. Going to the gym takes, I don't know, it depends who you are, but an hour to an hour and a half out of your day. Have you found trends that CEOs are just more likely to take time out now than they were 10 years ago to do that sort of thing?
It's not something we've reported on actually, but I certainly see it as something more recognised. I remember seeing a story, I forget the man's name, but he was a CEO of Santander, went to Lloyds Bank. I remember the story in City AM was that he was turning up at Lloyds Bank's door, their offices at 6 a.m. in the morning, and no one was in, and he was furious that there was no one there. And I think it's Antonio Rosario, a couple of years later, he had a breakdown, and he was very open about the fact that he had a severe burnout breakdown, and then has spoken a lot since about the importance of looking after mental health. So again, go back even 10 years ago, and CEO saying, I'm going to take some time out of work to do some therapy this week, would probably be looked at in a certain way, and now would be looked at and admired for doing that and for being open about it. So I think there is that culture shift for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's really helped that there have been some like great role models. I mean, not least in sort of the world of sport, where people are generally pretty buttoned up about that stuff historically, but you know, openly talking about certainly the nutrition and that side of things, but then also more the mental health side of things as well. Yeah. So I think one of the, obviously you're very biased being from a particular organization, but let's leave Wellhub aside. What are some of the practical steps that my audience of HR leaders can be taking to really move the needle on well-being?
So I think, as I said before, first thing is make sure that as much as possible, you're not contributing to people's well-being challenges.
Yeah.
So it comes back again to, do people feel they have flexible work schedules? Is it accepted that they can fit things into their day that are not strictly work-related, like exercise or school pickup, as we said? Do they feel that they can speak to their manager if there's a problem with their mental health, or are managers generally just checking in with them? And are leaders role modeling the ability or the necessity to look after your well-being proactively? So that's the first thing, is just make sure that you're not, as much as possible, contributing to a negative well-being experience. Then the other side of it is thinking about, well, what are the kind of nudges that we can give people? What are the ways that we can try to remove barriers to make people able to look after their well-being? And I think that just takes a little bit of cleverness in trying to bring all of the different elements of well-being together. I see many companies who will kind of look at all those different elements of well-being and they'll pick one or two things to really focus on. So they'll go and they'll look after their fitness and they'll put together a good gym benefit, but then they won't think about mental health. Or they'll offer EAP, which gives them, support in a crisis for therapy, but no ongoing support for their mental health.
Yeah.
So it's about how do these things fit together, and don't just try to look for, right, okay, well, we've done tick box here, we've done that, we've got a bit of something here offered by our insurance provider, we've got all these little bits and pieces. It has to fit together collectively and holistically. And then on the other side is how can you try to remove the barriers that are going to allow people to look after their well-being in different ways. So as I mentioned, one of those is cost. That's really important. But it's also really important to know that cost is not the only barrier. And all the science on behavior change says that if you just give people money to do things, that's not enough to change behaviors. You have to change their perceptions, and also you have to make things easy for people. So I see lots of companies give people money and they'll say, here's £50 a month, look after your well-being in whatever way you want. And I think the challenge with that is, number one, £50 a month doesn't actually go very far. Again, we've said it probably doesn't cover a gym membership in London. It's only going to allow you to look after one element of well-being, and we know that it's all very connected. But equally from a company perspective, and this is the key thing, whatever you're doing within well-being, it has to be sustainable. It has to be something you can defend to your CEO and your CFO. What we hear increasingly from companies is that those kind of schemes are just completely unsustainable because the cost skyrockets, because you have no economies of scale. If you're a big business, you're a 1,000-person business, you should be able to negotiate on behalf of 1,000 people. It gives you some kind of purchasing power. But actually, if you're giving people £50 and they're spending it however they want, then that money is going in dozens, maybe even hundreds of different directions. So there's no kind of economies of scale.
The thing that I really liked you saying, we would as we were walking up to the studio today, was if you do that kind of program, like the people who spend it on the gym are the people who are going to go to the gym anyways. You're just giving everyone a bit more money and not impacting how they behave.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it comes back to, is what's the point of a wellbeing strategy? Are you doing it purely for engagement? In which case, fine to give them the money, but equally just give everyone £50 extra on their salary because that's all it amounts to really. Or are you trying to affect change? And as a company, if you really want to drive ROI, you have to be in a position where you're changing people's behaviors, and money alone isn't going to do that. And again, the point about being sustainable, if you put in place a wellbeing program, it's very, very difficult to then remove it. So you have to know that if you have a high number of participation, which is what you want, right? You want 50% of people using your wellbeing strategy. Well, if you're giving all of them £50 a month and the money is going up and up and up, how do you even begin to budget for it? Do you assume that 20% of people are going to be enrolled? Well, if halfway through the year, the wellbeing program is really successful, it then is 30%, 40%, 50%, your cost is going to be twice as high as expected. And then I think I see lots of companies get into this horrible trap where they actually start hiding mention of the gym subsidy, right? They won't tell new starters about it. They'll hide it on their intranet page. And what that means is you're defeating the point of a wellbeing strategy in the first place. So it's much more important to think about what are the things that we can do that are going to allow people to change behaviors. So it has to impact the people who wouldn't just be going to the gym anyway. And B, make sure it's something that you can defend to your CFO, and it can be something where the more successful it is, the better it is for the business, and it's not getting more expensive on a one-to-one basis.
So you got to start the whole thing, like with any project, from a target, and your target's got to feel like, okay, well, we want more engaged, higher productive workforce.
Yeah.
And that means they need to do these more and more people need to do these 5 things.
Yeah.
And that means we need to do X, that we need to help them with the cost, because that's one of the barriers you were saying before, and remove and get the culture in and all the rest of it. Yeah. But I imagine there's probably a big communication piece that goes with it as well, which is we kind of expect you to do this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, again, with behavior change, we know from like nudge theory and whatever else, it's like everybody knows they need to eat 5 fruit and veg a day. They know they need to do 10,000 steps. They know they need to exercise how many times a week. They don't do it, even though they know it. So just telling people isn't enough. It has to be...
What do we do, Luke?
Yeah. Give people a different experience. So again, I don't want to sound like I'm plugging anything, but the idea of Wellhub is that it gives people a completely different experience to what they've had before. So they have one membership, and with that membership, they can use any, in fact, all of the 3,000 different gyms we have in the UK. So they can use a different one every day if they want to, which is very helpful for remote work and whatever else. Within the same membership and no extra cost, they can speak to a therapist and a PT and a nutritionist, and they can look after all the different elements of wellbeing that I've mentioned with things like Headspace and Strava and MyFitnessPal.
Oh, cool.
And they can do all of that. You notice I say and, it's not or. They don't have to pick and choose between pillars. They do all of it. And all of that will cost less than them going to one of the gyms that they're using. So the cost barrier is gone, but you also get this thing, one of my colleagues has coined the dabble effect, which is where somebody joins purely to go to the gym, but then they realize they can see a therapist in the same membership, no extra effort. It's just there on their app and they can actually book in to see a therapist. Maybe they're then going to start doing therapy for the first time in their life, and they're all of a sudden going to start looking after their well-being in a way they never would have.
Yeah, then the therapist says, hey, listen, you're not sleeping properly.
Exactly.
You got to really take sleep seriously. So there's that kind of
reinforcing.
Exactly.
Great, within the same membership, no extra cost. I can look after my sleep with a really expert app. So that's giving something that you can't get with a normal. It's very, very difficult to replicate that experience. So again, if you think about someone who's never looked after their physical health, never looked after their mental health, that should be enough to pivot their behavior a little bit. Whereas giving them money will never be enough.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I feel like this space has changed like completely beyond recognition since I started working. We never talked about mental health in the workplace. It would have been really bizarre. Yeah. We didn't work from home, so the flexibility thing wasn't wasn't a thing. Certainly didn't talk about women's health in the workforce. We've still got a long way to go with that, but we're all I think moving in the right direction. What's next?
Well, first, I think you're right. I think I was saying to you before, when we started in the UK 9 years ago, say, 1 in 10, probably more than 1 in 3 of the companies I would speak to, the conversation would be, why would I give people their salary? It's up to them to do what they want. That's very rare now.
I bet it was more than 1 in 3.
Yeah, very, very common. Now it's probably more like 1 in 100. Very few companies are in a position where they don't know they have to look after well-being. Women's health, you mentioned, I think is a really important one. 5 years ago even, people weren't talking about menopause. Now it's almost mandatory to have a menopause policy and to have support for that. So it's really important to see how much things have changed, but how quickly things have changed as well. I think in terms of where we're going, I think I'm going to drop the buzzword here. You know, AI is going to propose some very interesting challenges for HR teams. Not just from a well-being perspective. I'm speaking now to HR directors who are saying, look, the number one thing that's keeping me up at night is the compliance challenges that AI is going to bring. But from a well-being perspective, I think the impact of on people's mental health, of their job perhaps changing because AI has taken some of it. We contributed recently to reports done by the University of Manchester, which was all around what kind of impact AI will have on people's health and well-being. And it's, I guess the key thing they were saying is that this is incredibly early stages. Like we're probably a year in from mass adoption of AI, and we just don't know where things are going to be in the next 5 years. So it's something that most companies, I think, are alive to, but need to get even more alive to say, well, what will be the impact if X happens, if Y happens? So I think that's really important. But I think the general trend within well-being is all around personalization, allowing people to do things as they want to, and then also integration. So seeing these things as being very much related, exactly as you said. If you speak to a therapist and they say you need to sleep better and you need to eat better and you need to exercise more, how are you making sure they have the support in place so they can do all of those things, not just one of them? Yeah,
I think you've hit one of my personal, I guess, bugbears or passions, which is I just feel like with AI coming in, we've got this sort of awesome but actually quite scary responsibility to build the workforce that we all want to work, the workplace that we want to work in. We could absolutely automate like pretty much everything you can imagine.
Yeah.
But actually, if we see this as an opportunity to say, well, what would a really great workplace look like? How would well-being fit into that? Where does AI fit into that? What do I want to do with my time?
Yeah.
I think those kind of architects of the new workplace, I can't think of any function that's better to do that than HR.
Yeah. I think it's a massive opportunity. I think if you think about the level of automation that can be done with AI, the amount of drudge work basically that can be removed from people, it's huge. And I think this is really like the second technical revolution, I suppose, after the internet. And when you think about how quick things are to do now than before the internet, we saved so much time there. Where did that time go? People are working longer than ever before now. They're more stressed than ever before. No matter how much time we saved, we just filled it with more work.
Yeah.
And I think in this next kind of evolution with AI, we have to try to think about, well, actually, if we can save 20% of people's time, then what do we do with that? Do we just give them more work to do? Or are we able to give people a 4-day work week or reduced hours or whatever it is? And exactly as you said, the people who are able to influence that are HR. So for people listening to this, it's like, how can you shape your business to be at the forefront of this, to be thinking about, if we're saving people's time, how can we free it up so that they're learning, or they're spending time with their family, or they're just developing themselves in all those ways that I think are really important. Because if we go down the path that we did with the internet, we're going to save a ton of time and we're just going to replace it with more stuff.
How's that? How's that for a call to action? I think we should end it there. Luke, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Felix. Great to see you.